Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Records Managers Forum, the first of 2026. My name is Martin Killian. I'm the Executive Director of State Records New South Wales. And I'd like to start this morning by acknowledging traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is a session that we at State Records have very much been looking forward to. We have our usual updates for you later in the meeting and a special session on the record keeping monitoring exercise. But we are thrilled and delighted to welcome the New South Wales Information Commissioner, Emeritus Professor Ros Croucher AM, to the Records Managers Forum. We know that it's a bit of a tradition with the Information Commissioners, which is symbolic of our very close relationship, that we have the Information Commissioner occasionally address this group. And I'm thrilled that Professor Croucher has agreed to speak with us today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Rosalind Croucher, she is, of course, the Information Commissioner appointed in June 2025. But has, of course, a significant and stellar, extraordinary amount of experience, over 40 years in the legal academy and government roles. She's a former president of the Australian Human Rights Commission. She's lectured and published extensively and has received many accolades for her contributions to public policy and to the legal profession. In 2014, she won the Australian Women Lawyers Award for her outstanding contribution to the legal profession, role in supporting and advancing women in the legal profession. And in 2015, her wonderful achievements was recognised by being made a member of the Order of Australia. Ros also has the title of Emeritus Professor bestowed on her by Macquarie University, and has also Honorary Doctorate of Laws from both Macquarie Uni and the University of New South Wales. And I have the great honour to call Ros friend. So without further ado, Ros, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I'm thrilled to speak to this group. The two-dimensional experience for me is, having done much lecturing and public speaking over the years, the 2D experience is always a challenge. So the disembodied group I will speak to, and if I go off on frolics of my own at different points, I apologise in advance. It's still early days for me as I embrace the specificities of my new role and our fantastic relationship with information on the regulator side and the government side. So I thought, and I'm going to, I've got some slides that I want to work through, so I might just pull those up and see how we go. As this is an exploratory talk in some ways for me, there are points where I may have too much information and I might hasten through some of the points, but everything that I have prepared will be available. And as a lecturer of habit, I have a paper that is full and could be available as well as part of the package of information. Old habits in writing and record keeping and referencing die hard, I'm afraid. So we played with this morning, so I'm going to try this format of sharing. Now, I'm going to share the window, and I have to get my PowerPoints happening. And Martin, can you tell me, please, if that has worked? You're on mute, Martin. I can see that.
You caught me out. You are clearly sharing, but we can't see anything. I can only see a white screen at the moment.
Oh, it says I'm sharing. That's it. All right, I might have to
Perhaps
It worked.
unshare and try again.
I will try again. All right, let's try again. This is the first time I've tried this format, so we'll try again. Let's see how we go. How's that?
That's wonderful. We are
All
good
right.
to go. Good to go.
Oh, thank you very much. All right. So I echo the acknowledgement of the traditional custodians, and I'm delighted, Martin. We bonded in over our love of records at our first meeting during Privacy Awareness Week last year. So I'm thrilled to be speaking to this group. So I thought in my presentation I'd talk a little bit about my pathway to my current role, and then to talk about the importance of the role of Information Commissioner and the IPC in the information management landscape, including the evolution of the current model of FOI to GIPA, issues of concern to the public, and some emerging challenges and some thoughts I have about the next bits of my role. But I need to open with a confession. And it's this. I do have a love of records. This grew from my study of history in my Bachelor of Arts, where for my honours thesis, I undertook a biography of this gentleman, the Renaissance diplomat, Sir Nicholas Throckmorton. He was a pretty cool guy. He was tried for treason twice under the Tudors, try saying that fast, and got off both times. But my love of records started then. And then my PhD was in legal history, and it was the history part that kept drawing me back into records, and especially the magic and mystery of manuscripts holdings and archives offices. And during my doctoral work, I spent many hours at Kingswood at the reading room, and also at the Rocks, which used to have quite a reasonable early collection of some probate records. And I was grateful, I have to say, that so many records had been kept by people and organisations from so many years ago. Hence, I have to say, records destruction or sentencing does cause me to have a bit of a shiver. I know it's an important part of records management, but as someone who has loved wallowing in the old records, it does cause me a little concern. The high point of some of this love of records was during a sabbatical, in fact, the last ever that I had in London in the first months of 2003, when I was a professor at Macquarie Law School, and I was taking a welcome break from being dean. And I was curious about an 18th century case that was the foundation of a particular legal doctrine, and it took me here to the National Archives, the Public Record Office in Kew in England, and into the wonderful mysteries of the court records, another building whose exterior masks its magical contents, I have to say. But it was very easy to be distracted by the work of others, especially those working on the Tudor rolls, wearing white gloves and with special props and weights for these treasured tomes. The 18th century documents I was working on were large vellum sheets inscribed in at least something resembling a modern script. And it was the combination of the work at the PRO and in the British Library and their collection of judicial records that provided the foundation for a series of publications that followed. Other adventures in records were exploring parliamentary records, manuscript collections, and other historical sources. In Sydney, both at Kingswood and in the marvellous collections at the State and Mitchell Libraries, and in similar repositories in Adelaide in New Zealand. There have been a number of eureka moments through all of that, slow and steady research and then uncovering the gem. You observe it at times in others in the reading rooms when they sit up and look out with a smile and sometimes a sigh. You may find something small that later becomes crucial, like the handwritten transcription I found in the British Library of the notebook of a handful of key judgments of the then Lord Chancellor, this is in the late 18th century, who had decided the case I had been exploring. This is a page from that. Now, I know it's a bit hard to see, but you can see there is a passage that is underlined. I've just made it a bit bigger. And that sentence, "this is a contract," underlined, was really crucial because that enabled me many years later to rebuff an argument that the doctrine should be considered as something entirely independent of contract. So it's just those little gems. Now, I have to say, I am very grateful for the increasing digitisation of records. The probate and UK census records, for example, were a fantastic resource in a biography I wrote about a 19th century woman who had an amazing career in the maritime world. Anyway, that's all the past. And leap forward to 2nd of June last year, when I commenced my appointment at the Information and Privacy Commission as Information Commissioner and CEO. This is my third position as a statutory office holder and my first in the state government world. I've been broadly involved in information and privacy issues over many years, so it's a familiar world in a general sense, both practically through being a dean of 2 law schools and then statutory office holders, and in a more conceptual and policy sense in my work at the Australian Law Reform Commission, where I roamed widely and at different points on the information spectrum between information access and secrecy. Now I have the opportunity to play an active role in aspects of this at the state level and as a regulator, and to navigate all the particular legislative niceties of the GIPA and GIC Acts. So I'm a very curious person, as you probably gathered by those early adventures in records. So I'm really relishing getting to know a new jurisdiction. Now, I know you're all experts, and I doff my metaphorical hat to all of you who are experts. I am not yet. I will be, but it's the beginning of a journey. And as I get on top of it and master the niceties, I'm always open to feedback, encouragement, and occasionally constructive, with an emphasis on that adjective, criticism. Anyway, the IPC was, as an agency, was established as part of the legislative reforms to FOI and privacy in New South Wales in 2009. And the new Office of Information Commissioner was brought together with the existing Office of the Privacy Commissioner within a new administrative agency, the Information and Privacy Commission, which commenced on the 1st of January 2011 to support both of the commissioners. What was curious to me in trying to get my head around exactly what my role was, unlike the ALRC, Law Reform, and the Human Rights Commissions, and indeed the Federal Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, the IPC is not created through distinct constituting legislation. Each commissioner has a distinct legislative base. In addition, the Information Commissioner acts as the agency head for employment and management purposes. So it's an odd role and different from, say, Elizabeth Tidd, who is now the head of the OAIC, and a previous Information Commissioner, who is the office head and like the presidential roles that I'm more familiar with in my previous lives. Together, the two of us, the two commissioners, have jurisdiction, as you would all appreciate, over all of these government bodies. And together, we undertake reviews and complaints in relation to information access and privacy. We have, though, distinct remits with distinct accountabilities. And although I'm CEO, I do not have any authority over my fellow commissioner, but I'm familiar with that kind of model because at the Human Rights Commission over my 7 years there, I actually worked with 19 other statutory office holders. I couldn't believe it myself when I added them up in preparation for my farewell. So I'm very familiar with working with other statutory office holders over whom I have no authority at all. the importance of our collegial and respectful relationship is crucial to making the IPC the best it can be. All right, but we are an independent agency, even though we aren't constituted through an IPC Act. And the functions that we have, both the Privacy Commissioner and I, are locked in through our legislative bases. And then the oversight we have is an interesting one. We are not subject to ministerial direction, but we do have an annual reporting mechanism, a review of our annual report through the Committee of the Long Name, as I call it, the Committee on the Ombudsman, Law Enforcement Conduct Commission and the Crime Commission. And there's a few other bodies included in that, including us. The fact of this parliamentary, this scrutiny and not subject to ministerial direction, just as an aside, we leveraged that accountability mechanism in relation to a standing order notice to produce in relation to cybersecurity. That may have affected some of you in this meeting, that it was a huge one in relation to cybersecurity. And we, all departments, ministers, and a whole bunch of independent agencies were issued this Standing Order 52 notice to produce. And we argued that we would not need to answer it, both because we were not subject to ministerial direction and we had a specific accountability mechanism through the Committee of the Long Name. Anyway, going to the FOI to open government bit, we marked 1st of July last year. We marked the 15th anniversary of the commencement of the GIPA Act, and it was the first legislative expression of it was in the FOI Act of 1989. FOI still is easier to say. GIPA is one of these peculiarities of our current landscape. I know it, but it doesn't trip off the tongue as Hamlet encouraged. It's FOI is still an easier thing to say. But we did start with an FOI Act in 1989, which was reflective of the Commonwealth Act of 1982. And both of them were an expression of open government, which was a big philosophical push across the common law world towards greater government accountability. And one of the best distillations of why it is important was this comment in a House of Lords case, the Crown and Shaler, by Lord Bingham of Cornhill. I love those names, in which he said that modern democratic government means government of the people, by the people, for the people. Very Abraham Lincoln. But there can be no government by the people if they are ignorant of the issues to be resolved. Experience, however, shows that publicity is a powerful disinfectant. It's a very potent justification for open government. He also continued that where abuses are exposed, they can be remedied. Even where abuses have already been remedied, the public may be entitled to know that they occurred. The role of the press in exposing abuses and miscarriages of justice has been a potent and honourable one, he said. But the press cannot expose that of which it is denied knowledge. Now, this was in 2003. Whether he would use precisely the same adjectives now is a matter of, with a question mark. What is interesting to me in kind of unpacking this idea is that the idea of responsible democratic government, representative democracy, reflected obligations to those who were electors in that democracy, to citizens, through the right and responsibility of voting in elections and referendums once they reach the age of 18. International law, though, added another dimension. because it conceptualized the framing of rights as vested in individuals as humans and not because of citizenship. And my 7 years at the AHRC impressed on me the importance of thinking about government accountability and privacy through a lens of individual rights, underpinned by Australia's commitments in ratifying the key international treaties, human rights treaties, in this context, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And in the key article of that ICCPR is Article 19.2, which concerns the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, receive and impart information and ideas of all kinds. And the key part of that is the freedom to seek, receive and impart information. That is the link to FOI laws. Crucially, you do not need to be a citizen to invoke rights to access government information. The New South Wales legislation from the very first iteration framed this right as a legally enforceable right in a person. And this inclusive approach aligns with broader human rights principles, which affirm that access to information is a right not limited by nationality or citizenship. The first generation of FOI laws were still cautious ones. The customary constraints of the Westminster system of responsible government still rested heavily on them, and the conventions of this system were seen to demand official secrecy. So these first acts embodied what's described as a pull model of information access. Based on a request, it was essentially a right to request rather than a right to information. They also included a long list of exemptions designed to protect essential public interests. There were minor amendments to the 1989 GIPA Act, FOI Act as it was, and I loved this one, the one that in 1992, the inclusion of two considerations about argued public interests. The fact that disclosure of information may cause embarrassment to or loss of confidence in the government or might be misinterpreted or misunderstood by any person were irrelevant and must not be taken into account. I rather regard this as the anti-Sir Humphrey provision. The reach of the legislation was extended in 1993 when local governments were brought into the reach of the Act, 2004, the counter-terrorism exemption, and in 2006, government contracts were added into the information that needed to be disclosed. Once the legislation was introduced, reforming it proved a bit difficult. Bruce Barber did a review of the, he reviewed the FOI Act, which led to this report, which in turn led to the GIPA Act. And he referred to the challenges in reforming FOI legislation because it creates a fundamental and significant conflict of interest for government and senior public officials. On the one hand, they have a duty to implement the legislation in accordance with its terms and spirit. However, implementing the legislation will quite often have a serious and occasionally damaging impact on their personal and political interests. This is very much redolent of the pre-FOI era. So with the public consultation that then followed, we got our GIPA Act, effective from July 2010. And it's an example of the second generation of FOI laws, which moves from a pull model to a push model, with the emphasis on having to provide information through open access, the authorised proactive release, the Exemptions approach and conclusive certificates are out. COPIADs and OPIADs, I still am getting my head around that. I encountered them on my first day, but balancing is in, and formal access is regarded as an action of last resort. It doesn't mean that everything is accessible, because there are still the pathway, the conclusive presumptions of overriding public interest and the other reliance on overriding public interest claims. They're not expressed in the language of exemption, but in a way it's the equivalent of exemptions in the form of a long list of factors against disclosure and a list of factors in respect of which there is a conclusive presumption. Not everything is amenable to the wide sweep of proactivity. Personal information deserves, of course, high order protection, and it is at the intersection point of the work of the Privacy Commissioner and the Information Commissioner. The conceptual shift from the pull to the push is underscored by the objects of the Act, with which I'm sure you are all familiar. What's interesting to me, going back to this idea of representative democracy and the rights of a citizen, the first part of the objects anchors itself in that idea of representative democracy, which you think is anchored in citizenship, because who is the democracy representing? But it's citizens who can vote them out. But later on, you see it's members of the public who are given the enforceable rights. So in those, I see both the history in its Westminster system of representative democracy, and then the members of the public, which captures that wider concept of information as a right. So jumping on, in the next parts, I just wanted to do a quick snapshot, and in this next bit I've got quite a few slides with a lot of stats on, but I'm just going to gloss over them a little bit and provide the detail to you as a package afterwards. I thought, well, knowing all of that, how do I know in my new role, well, what do the people think about this right to access? Going from the theoretical to the real world of people who are the public who I serve, what do they think of this right to information? Well, and in exercising that right, what issues do they find problematic? And I want to draw here on two sets of survey data, one in relation to community attitudes, and the reports on the GIPA Act the Information Commissioner has to deliver each year. So this slide is from the Community Attitudes Survey, and it shows a continued perception of the right to access government-held information as important. This is from a national survey. So each year, the Information Commissioners across Australia contribute to data into the national survey through the community attitudes. And this is from the survey from last year that was published in October. Commitment, this sense of the government and its agencies should publicly report on the information they maintain. And the importance is, I think, is really strong. But one of the things that I found curious, apart from universities, with respect to all other agencies, over 1 in 10, so just over 10%, reported staff as being unhelpful, which isn't a really nice thing to hear. Mind you, with the volume of information access, well, both the proactive obligations and also the increasing demands of through informal and formal access applications, it's a big burden. And reporting staff as being unhelpful is just one kind of part of a multifaceted story, I would think. Right, well, the next, just very quick run through some trends that have come out of the Section 37 reports. Every year, the Information Commissioner has to report to Parliament on experiences across the pathways of accessing information. And so this is a more granular level that really is anchored in GIPA and the experience of the IPC in relation to GIPA applications. And what the annual reports show, and I've got some trends data that's just captured here. Oh, the latest report, we're just finishing at the moment, and that will be tabled in May. What they do is they provide a comprehensive assessment of the operation of GIPA legislation and looks at the performance of over 270 public sector agencies. And what we see is a steady increase in demand year on year, and that itself reflects, I think, higher expectations of transparency. Also, it reflects increased legal representation and the growing complexity in requests, particularly where personal and non-personal information intersects. Okay, so this, the first slide captures the open access information. Interestingly, that last dot point, that complaints relating to open access have consistently formed a significant proportion of the complaints to the IPC. I think underscoring the visibility of this pathway to the public and also how important they find it. So if they feel that they are not getting what they want, they're open to complain about it. The second one is the authorised proactive release. The annual review process seems to be working all right. It certainly was embraced early on in our data collection, but there's been a bit of a drop-off in the annual reviews. We get some insights through the GIPA tool, and particularly this last one, I think it's important that it's evident that there is some early consideration of some of the transparency issues linked to digital systems, AI and automated decision making. Informal release, the most frequently used access pathway, interestingly and significantly outstripping formal applications in volume, suggesting people just want to send an email, get on the phone, get stuff quickly without being constrained too much by the formal pathway. So here we've sought as an agency to strengthen the material that we provide. I'm going to come back to that in one of my concluding thoughts because it's something that interests me greatly. Data capture and consistency remain incomplete. These are trends that I'm sure you've all seen already. Going to the formal access applications, dramatic increase, as I mentioned, driven largely by members of the public and legally represented applicants, and they continue to rise steadily. Now, that's going to put a burden on all of you, and it puts a burden on the IPC in terms of the exponential increases have a ripple effect across the entire information access ecosystem. And as the numbers grow, the expectations grow, delays can grow. So it's a battle, I think, for all of us. Notwithstanding that, the release rates have remained stable. So that does indicate, as we've said here, resilience in agency decision making, and that's not a small ask in that context of increasing obligations of access and increasing demands for access. The overlap, partly personal and partly other information, it does increase that. It does reflect that the complex information environments and the dispersed nature of data holdings. Interestingly, in terms of the review avenue, and I'm particularly interested in that as we are an external reviewer, it shows a gradual shift towards internal review, with external reviews to the Information Commissioner declining proportionally, while remaining a critical quality and oversight mechanism. I was curious to find in my review function that it is a fairly weak model of review. Some of the other jurisdictions have determinative powers in relation to an Information Commissioner review. The model is a weaker one in New South Wales, while we have significant regulatory functions. In terms of the review function, it is actually weaker than some of our fellow agencies across the country. Another dimension is the ability to resist or rely on the conclusive presumptions. And these, I note that the increase in reliance on COPIADs, and these were the two highest: care and protection of children, and also legal professional privilege. It should actually be called client legal privilege, but it's called legal professional privilege in the Act, so I'll just leave it there. Most relied on in university and state-owned corporation sectors. Just a quick snapshot of we did a desktop review, the Privacy Commissioner and I. It was initiated by Chris Clayton, who was acting in my role for 6 months last year. And we released the desktop review of information guides and privacy management plans in relation to the expressed use of AI or ADM. It was just a desktop review. It didn't go behind the numbers. So it doesn't actually reveal detail to a great extent of what activity is going on under the surface. But the statistics provide the basis of an opening line of conversation. That was the question in relation to transparency. There was also in relation to accountability, because the accountability to the public is where we start to get into the robo-debt territory, which I still retain a deep interest in. It's when the accountability about how decisions are made, that's in the ADM side of the acronyms there. To fully exercise the right to access information, individuals need to know how a decision is made and what information was used to reach the decision. The rights of people to access remain applicable where government uses technology to provide services and inform decisions, but part of that knowing and holding government to account is knowing how ADM was used. It's the explainability part of decision making. And I think through all of those, in terms of use of ADM tools in service environments, we have to remember robo-debt. And there was a report that the Federal Attorney General released yesterday or the day before. You wouldn't want it released on Sunday, which was the Ides of March. If you don't know the skit "Rinse the Blood Off My Toga," you must look it up. Rinse the blood off my toga, and the wonderful line, "Don't go, Julie, don't go," which was Mrs. Caesar urging her husband Julius not to go to the forum on the 15th of March. What else do I want to say? Oh, yes. I'm going to go back here for a minute. I think I can previous. So I'm going to, yes. All right. I'll stay on this one. Before I explain about this, I have to say that, and this is kind of looping back to where I start, and I've got 1 minute, I think, Martin, left, or 2 maybe. I remember the old days of card catalogues and microfiche. I confess, have a copy of the compact Oxford Dictionary that my late godfather gave me, the 2-volume set in tiny, tiny print that came with its own magnifying glass. It was like a hard copy microfiche edition. It was a wonderful thing that ended up being a riser for a computer or a monitor at one point. And I also remember how excited I was when Macquarie University brought the CD-ROM version of the English reports, which made them searchable. And then the era of Google searching, which was like the shift from the motor car to the aeroplane. Now they call it Copilot or other useful tools. Although the danger in Copilot, even the version that's made that is sanitized for use within my office, still makes egregious errors in terms of the legislation it cites and everything. So really be careful with its use. But I think in a few short years, we will be having a very different conversation about the use and impact of AI as it becomes standard use across the digital space. I also wonder, Martin, whether it'll atrophy our brains or rather develop the skill of framing search questions to a fine art. So why I've got this slide, one of the things that intrigued me when I applied for the job and did a bit of my homework was looking at all of the public resources. And I was thinking in quite a few of them that they were perfect, but not the most accessible. And I thought that there was a wealth of an opportunity to bring my abiding interest in effective communication to the wide range of content that we have. And so I asked our head of comms, exactly how many information access resources we have. He said, about 150. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so it was a bit like this. And I said, well, is there a mind map? Is there a tree diagram of how they all relate to each other? And he said, no, but we're working on it. So and thinking of it, they're all technically accurate, but are they meeting their mark? There are some that do and a lot that don't. So my big mission that I have, my mission, should I accept it, which I have, is to try and make a bit of headway, develop a methodology for reviewing certainly the information access ones, because that's my statutory remit, to see in terms of accessibility. We have some feedback on resources that are well regarded, and I'm using that as a bit of a benchmark, and some work that we did a few years ago before I came here in terms of how you frame user-friendly, accessible communication. And I want to be looking at that because at the moment it's just like this. To me, it might be a bit unfair, but in large measure, it feels like an unsorted pile of Lego blocks. That's why I thought this was a nice one. So I want to at least sort them into the right colours and then see how they relate to each other. I haven't got any more Lego slides to share, but the strong emphasis on audience and the corresponding tone and voice of each particular resource is something that I hope to contribute in the coming years. So as we approach the 20th anniversary of the GIPA Act in 2019, so that's in the last part of my term, I finish in 2020. And so there are two things I would like to see by that time. One is that I've been able to have an impact on the outward facing material in relation to information access. And I think it will be time, so in that year, for there to have been, certainly well underway in 2019, a review of the GIPA Act and also a consideration of the structure of the IPC as to whether it's the structure and the powers that we have are effective to deliver those fine aspirations reflected in the objects of the Act. And a review like Bruce Barber had done, it will be time then, and particularly if we get expanded functions on the proposed digital identity verifiable credentials arena, it will be time for there to be a solid review. I bring my law reform head into that. That will be a good moment, I think, for there to be a decent contribution to reflections on the functioning of the Act. Martin, that's all I've got to say. I'm indebted to this audience for being patient with me as I learn my role, and I'm really open to your questions, suggestions, guidance as to how my role and the role of the IPC can really together that we can best serve the objects that are captured in that in the Act to be that powerful disinfectant that Lord Bingham of Cornhill spoke of in his judgment back in 2003. So thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Ros. Thank you so much. I certainly don't think you need to beg forgiveness from this audience. It was enthralling and so valuable to, first of all, reflect on that sort of evolution, if you like, of that function around FOI and GIPA. And of course, to this audience, and certainly to me personally as Head of State Records, to be constantly hearing the words around accountability and transparency and public responsiveness is certainly a wonderful message for this audience as well. And as well, your thoughts around sort of your contribution during your term as Information Commissioner, which I think is certainly something to look forward to and certainly something very exciting. So I look forward to continuing our association in those years to come, but also very much to thank you for this morning's presentation. You are a most welcome guest at any time in the future for our Records Managers Forum. It would be wonderful to have you along again at some stage. I might just see if there are any questions or comments. We traditionally have those written in our Q&A panel there, so I'll just open that up for anyone who might have any questions. Which at this stage there doesn't appear to be. So I think we'll leave that there. Ros, again, my heartfelt thanks for this morning. It has been wonderful and a great honour to have you along this morning. And I know the 170 or so people who are listening to us live very much appreciated your presentation and your insights very much. So thank you very much. You are, of course, very welcome to stay for the rest of the forum if you're able to. Entirely up to you, but thank you very much.
My really great pleasure, and I really wish you well. And do send me, as I invited, it was an open invitation. I do welcome some contributions of that kind, and you know, I will. Part of my methodology in looking at those comms is to get a focus group together too, and test out, you know, the differences in nuance. Anyway, it's all fun, and I love learning new stuff and meeting new people. So although I'm in this disembodied world of two-dimensionality, I do send my warmest wishes to all of you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Ros. Thank you. All right, if we could move on now to our next part of the Records Managers Forum. So I'll welcome Catherine Robinson, our Senior Advisor in State Records, and also Joe Carlos, our Project Officer within State Records, for a presentation and question and answer session concerning the record keeping monitoring exercise, which I should be at the front of everyone's mind right now. Catherine, over to you. And you're on mute, Catherine.
Okay. Can you see the record keeping monitoring exercise slide?
We can see and hear.
Fantastic. Okay, so this morning I just wanted to mention that we're in week 3 of the record keeping monitoring exercise, and the monitoring exercise is due to close on the 27th of March, which is a week next Friday. So I hope everybody's underway with either preparing their assessment, they've submitted their assessment. So if you are in the process of getting ready to do an assessment, please remember to download the 2025 version of the Records Management Assessment Tool to do your assessment. Don't use an older version of the RMAT because there is a few differences in the 2025 version that you will need to look into. Also, as part of getting ready to do your assessment and to lodge it, you will need a service portal login. If you don't have a service portal login, please get in contact with us. The email address is down the bottom. We can very quickly and easily get you a login and get that going for you within a day. Now, we also have a new service portal user guide, which takes you through step by step on how to actually load your submission into the service portal and get a copy of your submission for your records. So Joe, I know, is very helpfully putting some links to various different things in the chat for you. And one of those will be the link to the service portal user guide. One thing that I will remind you of with your assessment is please remember to identify evidence for each question of the assessment and to copy that information into your submission when you load it in the service portal, because we are having a look at the evidence for each question. So the RMAT and the record keeping monitoring exercise is an evidence-based assessment approach. So we do need you to identify the evidence for us so we know what you relied on when you were making your assessment. As mentioned in all our communications, we will be doing a verification process for the monitoring exercise, and that is on a sample basis. So we'll be contacting a small sample of public officers in April to ask them to participate in the verification process, and then we'll be having meetings with those public officers. And the verification process is really about confirming that the correct maturity levels have been chosen and that the evidence that has been identified actually supports the answers that you've provided in the assessment submission. And lastly, the results of the RME will be reported in July. We'll be doing our usual state of record keeping report, and we'll also be sending out scorecards to all the public officers. Now, what we wanted to do for the rest of the little time that we have allotted here on our agenda today is take your questions. So I am actually going to stop sharing this slide so that I can see everybody. Okay, here we go. Did that. Okay.
So Catherine, do you want me to field these questions perhaps so that you can
Joe,
concentrate on responses? Or...
Joe and I have got a two-person scenario worked out. So Joe's going to look at the chat for me and feed me questions. Now, if the question is really specific to your own organisation, we might actually suggest that we'll get in contact with you after the event and respond. But obviously far away, and we'll see how we go in terms of answering your questions. So Joe, do we have any questions?
We do. So we have a question from Kay, and Kay asks, does that mean we don't have to re-answer each of the questions in the portal, that we can upload the whole submission?
Okay, so you need to do your assessment of the which in the records management assessment tool, which is the 19 questions. Then when you go to the service portal, you will need to go through each question of the assessment form. So you'll get the 19 questions again. You'll need to select the response that you arrived at for your assessment in the RMAT. Cut and paste the comments and the evidence that you have in your RMAT, and that's all you need to do in terms of making your submission. So basically what you're doing is transposing the information that's in your RMAT assessment across into the service portal submission. That's all it is. So the hard work is actually over in going through the RMAT assessment. Service portal is really just uploading that information so that we can see it in a standardized format and review the state of record keeping performance across the jurisdiction.
Dave has just provided a little cheeky tip about the RMAT in the Excel version for anyone who wants to have a look. Sharon has asked, how do we address lack of evidence if we have a low maturity level on a question?
Okay. In the evidence field in the service portal, please just note that you don't have evidence and that that highlights to us that there's obviously some challenges in your organisation in responding to this particular question, and you're flagging that for our reference that there's obviously we'll see your low maturity for a score, but if you can also explain that there is a lack of evidence at this point to tell us about, that you haven't been able to identify evidence, that would actually be really helpful. It will also mean that I don't send you an email saying, oh, you've missed question such and such. Could you tell me what the evidence is? So all those kinds of extra bits of information you can give us is also very, very helpful.
Larissa, just to echo what Angela has said, please feel free to pop your questions here in the chat or the Q&A, or even if you'd like to raise a hand and ask a question directly. Doris has mentioned that it's just a shame that there's a 3,000 character limit, I'm assuming, on the service portal when they're putting evidence or comments. Andrew has asked, what is your sampling criteria to determine what agencies will be contacted post-RME submission? When will agencies be contacted post-RME submission / verification, if ever, i.e. May or April?
Okay, so yes, there is a range of criteria. At this stage, that's still under discussion, so I won't actually comment on that at this point. It will be a small sample, and obviously, as you're aware, we are a small team, so we will be doing a sampling effort that is actually commensurate with the size of the team. Public officers that are selected for the verification process will be contacted, I think probably around the 13th of April for their participation in the verification process. So if you haven't heard from us by mid-April, then I think you can probably safely say you're off the hook. So it will be a small sample. We will be contacting you by mid-April, and what it will involve is actually a Teams meeting for approximately an hour and a half as we go through your RME submission with you. And as I said before, it's validating that the correct maturity levels have been selected in the submission, and that the evidence that you have identified is relevant to the question and the maturity level that has been selected. So, yeah.
Simon's asking, do we upload all the proof of evidence or just record the fact that we have it on our internal records?
Okay, you can't actually upload evidence to the portal. What you're asked to do is to identify the evidence that is relevant to supporting the maturity response that you have chosen in the assessment process. So in the service portal guide, we've actually asked everybody not to use bullet points because it does drive the service portal mad. So really just each line, put in the evidence that is relevant to that question that supports the maturity level that you have chosen. That's all you need to do. You don't need to upload you can't upload, but also we don't really want you sending us evidence via email attachments, etc. as well. So just identify what's relevant to that question.
All right. Elizabeth asks, are we able to put in a 0.5 score in the portal?
No, I'm sorry, it's whole numbers only. So if you have not quite got to, say, for instance, a 3, you need to select a 2. There's no half measures, unfortunately, in the scoring.
Wonderful. Antonina asks, in the evidence column, do we also need to add our internal reference number for the evidence piece, or just list the name of the document, example, Information Asset Register?
just list the name of the document. I would suggest that if you have a master list of your evidence, make sure you've got your document reference number in that master list that you hold on to, so that you can easily identify what you were referring to in your submission. But for our purposes, we just need to know that it's a policy about such and such, or it's the Information Asset Register, or you conducted a systems audit in 2025. Those are the sort of like, in other words, those kinds of pieces of information are the key to the evidence response.
And Joe asks, will there be a penalty if the evidence doesn't accurately reflect the score?
Okay, when we have a meeting with the Public Office about their RME response, obviously if the evidence doesn't demonstrate that it's as relevant as it could be, we will have a conversation with you about it at that particular time as part of the meeting on verification. But I would suggest that when you're actually looking at the evidence, really aim for the things that really emphasize and really demonstrate that you have met the criteria in the maturity levels. So that's what we would call relevant evidence, that it demonstrates that you've met those maturity criteria.
There's no other questions in the chat or the Q&A, but just to put it out there, Jessica's provided a recommendation. She seems to have found it very useful that they actually keep a schedule of evidence to refer to, which Catherine did cover in an earlier question.
And I would just say, if anybody does have any specific questions for their organisation's assessment response, feel free to send those through to our GovRec email address. We're very happy to discuss those with you. If you need any further assistance, or if you need a service portal login, feel free to get in contact with us. Very happy to help or have a meeting with you if you need that as part of the process. And once again, RME finishes next Friday week, 27th of March. Yeah, but please get in contact if there are any problems or you're having any issues.
Great. All right. Thanks, Catherine and Joe, for
okay.
that. I'll now hand over to Angela McGing, our Manager of State Records, for an update of various things from us. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. I think Catherine's going to share the slides. I just want to note that I am very busy finalising our RMAT for submission to Martin to get approval to log it in the service portal. So we are sharing your pain, although actually it's been pretty good. Next slide, Catherine. Just wanted to give a quick update in the disposal authority field. We have reissued GA48, which allows you to destroy source records after migration. No changes were made to that. We replaced the old GA35 with GA50. This permits you to take or send records out of New South Wales. There isn't a great deal of difference between GA50 and 35. We clarified that you can actually send records out of New South Wales and in fact out of Australia, as long as you're complying with the disposal authority and also with any cybersecurity guidelines or policies that are issued. It also clarified some of the issues around taking state archives out of the state. GA47, which is for tertiary education and research, is being reviewed. A lot of public officers use this, even though it was developed by the universities for their research programs. It's up on the website, so if you can take a look and get it back to us, comments back to us by the end of March. We're hoping to get it to the board meeting in April. We've also been working with museums of history to make some decision trees available. They're on the website. This is to assist with using GA51, which allows you to destroy records after copying, because there's been a little confusion there. And there's also a decision tree to help you sentence some local government records. It's not the whole of the Local Government Disposal Authority. It's just 4 of the most used ones. Next slide, Catherine. We've got some new resources available on the website. There's a very cute new animation on record keeping responsibilities. We've released a new e-learning module just for disposing of local government records, which we're hoping will help all the local government people. We've got some new guidance on internal process audits for record keeping and induction training. And we are actually developing a suite of guidance which will include updating our business systems checklist, a risk-based approach to record keeping, data governance and information governance. And Andrew Warland has prepared some advice on an EDRMS versus SharePoint for managing your records. That will go up on the website very soon. Thank you for the clap. And I think that's finished. That's me, Martin.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Angela. We've just got one question from Susanna in respect of the Disposal Authority about sending records outside and whether that covers storing outside of Australia also.
It does, because this is just happening. The only thing it doesn't cover is creating records outside of Australia, because the Act is very silent on creation of records. It's only about taking or sending them. So, but yes, definitely it covers storing records outside of Australia.
Yeah, great.
But not state archives that are hard copy. We won't let you send them outside of Australia.
Indeed, indeed. Great. All right, thank you. And look, there's some requests in the chat just for some links to the animation in the Local Government Records e-learning. So if one of the team could put those links in for the benefit of everyone, that would be great. I think Rihanna and Gina are working feverishly doing that. So thank you very much. Yeah. And look, a comment there particularly from Susan, but I know generally the complimentary comments that we've received about our e-learning modules and our animations. And I guess 2 things here. These are very much intended to support you in your roles as record keeping professionals and your advocacy for good record keeping across your own public offices. So we certainly hope that they are of benefit and of use to you and to your agencies. And we would also, of course, as always, very similar, echoing the comments from Ros Croucher earlier, very welcome any suggestions or thoughts around improvements concerning the advice and the guidance that includes e-learning modules that you have. We do this for your benefit, and these things need to work for you. So if you have identified some gaps in that advice and guidance, or you can identify improvements and like to convey those, please feel free to do so. All right, I think that brings us to a close for this morning's forum. I've just had a last minute question from Tanya about an update about the revision to GDA 21. Angela.
I do. It was slightly held up by the single digital patient initiative, and we had some discussions with them, but we are going to restart that process very soon. So I'm hoping we'll be able to send out an exposure draft.
And we'll keep everyone updated on that.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Good. And then there are just, again, comments and requests for links to material on our website. So I will draw the forum to a close. Thank you to, as always, my State Records colleagues for their, as always, very knowledgeable information and my appreciation for that. And also to echo and reiterate my appreciation for Ros Croucher's attendance today and her presentation, which I think was extraordinarily valuable in terms of her own thoughts around the role of the Information and Privacy Commission and its evolution, both past and future. Thank you all for your attendance for this morning, and we will be in contact concerning our next forum a little later in the year. But for now, bye-bye. Thank you again.